So, B'shus Rosh Koilel, this is a very short visit in Lakewood. We arrived very late yesterday night and we're leaving tomorrow. But whenever I visit a community, it's always a big schis to speak to the Koilel. The Koilel is the soul and spirit of every Jewish community. And especially I am very moved by the idea of this Koilel, Mechanchim, that come together every day. Lolon bo'umko shel halacha. So it's a schus, it's an inspiration, and it's a privilege for me to be able to spend some time with you. La'asok v'divrei Torah. So I understand you're learning Daf Yomi, and now we learn the sugyas in Yeshnoichlin, Mishameis, the sugyas of Dini Yerusha, and Matna Shchivmera. When I have an opportunity to speak to a koilel, which I don't have every day, because I give shiurim in many koilelim in Eretz Yisrael on a steady basis, so I learn and I teach Lefi Seder Halimud, but I do not recall being in this koilel before, and I don't know when I'll have an opportunity next time. So I always like to say something significant, something meaningful, something that's nogea aloha lamaisa. And what I want to speak about in this brief shiur today is Avurei Ahsanta. Lo teheve be'avurei Ahsanta. Chazal say one should not kosev nechosav la'acherim v'heniachas yoshov. And not only a person should not give to strangers and jeopardize his legal halachic yorshim, even from one son to the other. And even mibrobisha lebrotava. Chazal say one should not discriminate. Kuf lamed gimel and bava basra, reish pei beis sif aleph and choyshe mishpot. And that is halacha she'ein of choylek. Well, Avraham Avinu, and we're learning Chumash Bereshis now, Bayitin es kol asheloi liyitzchok, he had two Yoshim, but he discriminated and he gave whatever he had to one of them. And Rashi says he wanted Yitzchak to get a good shidduch, so he probably decided that I'll have better proposals if I'll have some money to offer. So in the Isser of Avurei Ahsanta, I have 4 gewaltige kashas. And I say gewaltige kashas. Nachle der Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is a Mishnah Daf Kuf Lamed. The Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is machadish bein hayoshim shera'uyim lareshet. A person could actually dictate the Dinei Yerusha. Even though Yerusha mishpat ksiv bei, and everybody agrees, ein odam yochal hasnois al divrei Torah, and even according to the shittas, B'dova shabamam and odam masna masha kosa b'Torah, Yerusha is an exception, but Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike says, v'hoyu b'yoim hanchilo yezbonav a-Torah nosnu reshus la'odam la'hanchel la'kol mi sheyirtza. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike says, you can't give a daughter if you have sons. But you could give one son more than the others. You could give one daughter more than the others. And that is Medinei Yerusha. Halachic Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike. V'halacha she'osor lehavir nachalo. How do these two halachas fit together? Isn't Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike a stira to the issa of Avurei Ahsanta? Ve'ein nere loimer, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is a prohibition, it's an aveira, and all Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike means to say that it's valid, that it's chal. No. Halachic Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike, umavia bekol arishonim, that is even halachat chela. How do we understand Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike together with the Isser of Avurei Ahsanta? Number 2, mitzvah lakayim divrei hameis. This is a sugya which would fit into Bava Basra, but it's actually more in Gittin than in Bava Basra. Mitzvah lakayim divrei hameis. And if a person before his demise, before he died, dictated what to do with his Yerusha, we need to be Makayim Devorav. I can't go into details, but there's a gewaltig machlokes in Rishonim. It says a kinyan or a mitzvah. The lashon of Chazal is mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis. But many poskim maintain it's not only a mitzvah, it is a kinyan. How does this go together with the Isser of Avurei Achsanta? Question number 3. I walked into the Bismedish and I saw it was publicized that I'm going to talk about Matna Shchiv Mara. So, at least we're talking some bit about Matna Shchiv Mara. Matna Shchiv Mara kiksuv v'chensurin dami. And that is a din of Lechat Chela. And a person, if he's a Shchiv Mara, many maintain Mitzava Machmes Mise, even if he's totally healthy, that's a Machloikas. Kechsuvim v'chemsurim dami. And he could dictate what to do with his Yerusha. Once again, how does that fit in with the Isser of Avurei Achsanta? One should not change Dinei Nachalois. And finally, the fourth question is Reish Nun Zayin Siv Zayin. The Ramu gives us the formula of what we call a tzava'ah hilchatit, a halachic tzava'ah. Because al pi halacha, you cannot change dinei nachlis, as I mentioned before. Even if in other monetary issues we paskin oda masna masha kosa betoira, Yerusha is an exception. So what is a halachic will? Halachic will is shu'achas lifnei moisai. It's a complicated document, and we won't go into details. But fundamentally, a halachic tzavua is, I'm not saying how to divide my Yerusha, because I have no input in how to divide the Yerusha. But halachic tzavua is, shu'achas lifnei moisai. But this goes against Lo teheve be avurei achsanta. You cannot and you should not change dinei Yerusha. So, fear gewaltige kashes on the basic assumption, ein l'shanois divrei Yerusha. Mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis, matna shchiv mara, the formula of halachic tzavua, and nachla de Rebbe Yochanan ben Broika, which is halacha psukot. There's a sefer Kerem Chemer, one of the Gedolim in Morocco, one of the Moroccan Gedolim, Rabbi Avram Anikaveh. Chelik Beisim Peidalad, he writes that the minig was in Fas, which is a major city, was a big Jewish center in Morocco, that by Matna Shchiv Mara, the Chochem Shebe'ir, the Rav, comes to visit the person that is ill, and he wants to give a Matna Shchiv Mara, and he warns him that he's over on the Isser of Avurei Achsanta. And this minig, to me, is the strangest minig I ever heard. Why will Chazal masaker matna shchiv marak eksum v'chemsurin dami? Kedei shelo titorev da'atei. Beautiful. He wants to give a matna shchiv mara, and we come to warn him. You're dying, and you're over a big avera, and you're going to have a lot of Gehenim. And that is a beautiful formula, Kedei Shelo Titorev Da'atei. Givaldig. He's going to die calmly, peacefully. Doesn't make sense. On one hand, Chazal matna shchiv maraki Kedei Shelo Titorev Da'atei, and the minig in Morocco was that the Chacham needs to come and warn him, you should know what you're doing now as an Aveira. This same minig is brought in 4 other Svarim of Chachmei Morocco. Eidish Yankov, Rabbi Yankov Bardugo, Mishpat Tzukov Yankov, Rabbi Yankov Even Tzur, Mishpotim Yeshorim. He was not in Morocco, he was the chief rabbi in Mitzrayim almost 200 years ago. They bring the same minig, but the way they explain the minig is very different. And the reason the Chochem or Chavrei Beis Din come to his house is not to warn him and to notify him that he's over an Isser, but for 3 different reasons. To verify that he is in a clear state of mind, that he has the ability and the mental capability to decide what he really wants. So they are to certify and to verify that he is in clear state of mind. They need to check that he's not under pressure from family members to give to Ploini or Almoini, that it's fair. And number 3, that he is not over and Avurei Achsanta. Not to warn him that he is over, but to see to it that he is not over. So exactly what are they supposed to check to see to it that he's not over an Avurei אחסנתא? So before I share with you my psak, which I know is a chiddush, and I know that many disagree with me, but lani es daiti, what I say is Torah's emes, and I'm very, very strongly convinced that this is psak emes la'amito. Shtar chotzi zochar. I don't know whether everybody is familiar. This is an Ashkenazi minig going back 600 years and maybe a bit more. Shtar chotzi zochar is when a person married off his daughter and he took a choshev edim, there was an agreement between father of the Kala and his son-in-law that when time comes, my daughter will get 50% of what my sons will get. And that is a gift to the new chassan. So even though al pi halacha, ein lebanais v'mokem bein klum, but to encourage Talmidei Chachamim to marry, to encourage people to take an Edom at Talmid Chacham, Minig Ashkenaz, going back hundreds of years, is a shtar chotzi zocher. It is brought 3 times in Ramah and Shulchan Aruch. Reish Pi Aleph and Chosh Mishpat Ziv Zayin, twice in Even Ezer, Simen Tzaddik and Simen Kuf Ches. Maharam means many early Ashkenazi Gedolim, going back at least 500 years, talk about shtar chotzi zocher. And that was a minig b'kilot Ashkenaz. We do not find it in Gedolei Sfarad. The Beis Yosef not even once brings the meaning of shtar chotzi zocher. But as I mentioned, the Rambu brings it 3 times, once in Chosh Mishpat and twice in Even Ezer. And the concept was, I promise my new chassan that when time comes, your wife is going to get part of the Yerusha. Not the same as what my sons will get, but 50%. More than 200 years ago, in Ktsoy Sechoshen and Achsam Soifer, we find shtar zocher sholem, not only chotze zocher. So in Ktsoy Sechoshen, I think it's in Kuf Lamed Gimel, we find zocher sholem. Noide biyuda madura kama Chosh Mishpat Chavav, we find shtar zocher sholem. The Achsam Soifer married twice. First shidduch, he got a shtar zocher sholem, and I held in my hand a tzilum of the Tanoim of the Chasam Sofer. Zivug Sheni, he agreed to chotzi zocher. Why is that? You know who Shveros in Zivug Sheni here? So to marry Rabbi Akiva's daughter, he let down his standards, and he no longer demanded a shtar zocher sholem. To marry Rabbi Akiva's daughter, he was willing to agree for a chotzi zocher. But Zivug Rishon, the Chasam Sofer had a shtar zocher sholem. And how does this fit in with Avurei אחסנתא? You're not allowed to change din Yerusha, not even from one son to the other. So the Bala Itur brought in Chosh Mishpat in Beis Yosef, the Bala Itur says that the issue of Avurei אחסנתא is only if you take everything away from one and you give to the other. But the Bala Itur is a das yochid. And the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch clearly say, anything you take from one and you give to another is a Avurei אחסנתא. So all these halachas psukos that we have in Chosh Mishpat and the minig of shtar chotzi zocher, how does this fit in with Avurei אחסנתא? So I mentioned, yeah, but shtar chotzi zocher deals with Yerusha. It's not now.
The present now, what are you giving him later?
It's changing Dina Yerusha. And in Ksubas Nun Beis as mashma, even b'shas shidduch we can't change Dina Yerusha, and we'll get to that soon. And that is the sugya Ksubas Nun Beis about Ksubas Benin Dichren. And we'll get to that in a few moments. So I mentioned that the concept of shtar chotzi zocher is an Ashkenazi minhag. Yes. However, Reb Chaim Palaji in Sefer Chukes Chaim brings that in Kirot Sfarad, we gave the girls 10% of what the boys get. So, you know, Sfardim are a bit different than Ashkenazim. And Sephardi families, fathers and mothers hope they'll only have bonim schorim and less nekevois. So the Ashkenazim, I don't know how you say in English, farginen, So the Ashkenazim forgive for the daughters 50%, the Sfaradim not really, so they give them 10%. But even Kehillah Sfarad, Reb Chaim Palazi writes that the minig was to give the girls and some of the Yerusha and not give the boys everything. That is a separate topic about how do you divide up Yerusha between boys and girls. Lani es daiti, shoresh dvorim. Chazal speak about havoras nachla. And Lani es daiti, the Isra of havoras nachla depends on the rationale, the reason why. And the Isra is only discriminating. Havoras nachla is kamo ein maviren al ha-mitzvahs. Don't skip. You don't skip one mitzvah to perform another. The sug of ein maviren al ha-mitzvahs we find in 3 different scenarios or situations. And in Minchas Rosh Kloni ha-mitzvahs there's a big arichas at the din of ein maviren al ha-mitzvahs. Ein maviren al mitzvah achas kedei lakayem et chaverta. And that is why you can't skip tefillin shel Rosh to be meniach tefillin shel yad, because you don't skip one mitzvah to be mekayim another. You don't skip a mokoim hara'ui mitzvah to be mekayim that very same mitzvah in another place, and that is kanois hamazbeach. You don't skip a zman hara'ui mitzvah to perform the same mitzvah in another zman, and that is megillah davova mit beis od rishon v'od sheni. So these are the various different sugyas. Menochas Lamed Gimel, in Yume Dafnun Gimel, and in Megillah Davav. Ein Maviren al ha-mitzvah says, only it is obvious you are skipping. Unlike other concepts. So this is Magdim el mitzvahs, mitzvah bo liyotcho al tachmitzena. Ein Maviren al ha-mitzvah says only when it's obvious you skip. You skip one mitzvah to perform another. Havoras nachla is only when the nature of what you're doing is you are skipping one to give another. The Rambam, Perek Vov Mehilchas Nachlis, and that is the Perek in which the Rambam writes the halachas of Havoras Nachla and the Isra of Havoras Nachla. The very vast halacha in this Perek, halacha Yud Gimel, the Rambam brings the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Yud. Lo olam lo yeshana odam ben bein habonim. The Gemara Shabbos Daf Yud writes, B'shol shnei slo milas nizgalgo advorim v'yordu aviseinu leMitzrayim. So Chazal say Yaakov Avinu gave eksonis pasim to Yosef, and that caused sinas achim. So whenever we speak about Masa Avos, we always need to be very careful and stress. This is in Yonim Nizgovim. We don't understand anything. The Avos HaKadoshim were greater than Malachi Elyon. Aber kach da'akum shel Chazal. We also are mefarish these parshiyos lifi pshuton kedei lilmoid musar v'das v'chochma. So Chazal say, Lo olam al yeshana odam ben abonim. Shnei slo milois. Because the eksonis pasim nizgalgu advorim v'yordu aviseinu leMitzrayim. What does that have to do with Avoras Nachla? This halacha should be in Hilchas Deos. In Hilchas Deos, Midas Chasidus, the Rambam writes it together with Avoras Nachla. After the halachas of Avurei Achsnatha, the Rambam writes that halacha which is in Shabbos Daf Yud. And this halacha is not in Bava Basra. It's a Masechet Shabbos Daf Yud. What I learned from this, the Rambam, but it's the same. So when the Gemara says, Lo Yeshana Odam Ben Abonim, it has nothing to do with the Yerusha. His kids are 10 years old. Don't discriminate. But Masam B'chol Yom, we buy something for Yankala, and not for Moshe, and for Rivka, not for Esther, but when the nature is, and what you're doing is discriminating. You're giving one more than the others. And you're conveying a message that you love one more than the others, that is wrong. And that is the Isur of Havoras Nachala. And therefore, this is a question I've been asked so many times. A person has 3 children. 2 of his children are businessmen, and they have a small family. One has 2 children, one has 3 children. His 3rd son learns in Koil. He has 10 kids, and he doesn't have Parnasa. Now, I'm not saying because he's a businessman he has 3 kids, and because he's a koilel guy he has 10 kids. No. Lav ho b'ho talya. But I'm just stressing, to make the question very obvious. So, from his perspective, he would like to give a bigger part of the Yerusha to his son that's learning in koilel. He doesn't have the means. He has 10 children to marry off. It goes without saying, I would like to give him more, and my other children will understand it. Is that an issur of avoras nachla? And I say no. No. When there's an objective reason which makes sense, which is justified to give one more than the other, that is not an issur of avoras nachla. Avoras nachla is only when the motive is not justified. It's not objective. There's not something real, a real reason why to give this one more than another one. And that is the nature of hakosev nachosev la'acherem veheniach ezbonov. Chazal stress. The issur is not a kosev nachosev la'acherem. The issur is heniach ezbonov. Why aren't you giving to your children? Isn't that natural? Brokare de avur. Your children took care of you. You took care of them. You should give Yerusha to your children. And therefore the issur of avoras nachla is only when the nature of avoras nachla is discrimination. Whenever there is an objective reason, which is a justified reason, then there is no issur b'chlal of avoras nachla. And that is why the Rambam brings this halacha, which is not really a halacha, or more musar, that is found in Shabbos Daf Yud. And we learn it from Yaakov Avinu, not from Parshas Nachlois. But the Rambam brings it together, not in Hilchas Deis, where the Rambam writes all the Midas Chasidus, but in Hilchas Nachlois, Perek Vav, together with the din of Avoras Nachal. Kach nera la'aniyas daiti. But when... Yes. Afilu mebro busha lebru tova. Don't, so Chazal say, don't discriminate. Dil menofek menei zara ma'alya. That is not justified. You're angry at one, you love the others more, even one is a rosh, one is a tzaddik. Chazal ba'oimik binosim say, that is not justification. But if one is in a greater need than the other, that is justification. So when a person says a Gavaldige Chiddush, even though he is so convinced that it's true, you look for sources. You don't want to be alone out there in the field. Shalas Shuvas Beis Yehuda. The Beis Yehuda is also the Mate Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda Ayash, who was one of the great poskim, Sfari poskim going back 200 years, and is quoted in all the later poskim. His most famous sefer is on Shulchan Aruch Mate Yehuda, but he also has Shalas Shuvas Beis Yehuda. Chelik Beis Benum Gimel. He deals with the question: a person wants to give a major part of his nachala to aniyim leilui nishmosoi. Is that a problem of Avurei Achsanta? And his tshuva could be interpreted in 2 different ways. In the tshuva he writes that the issur of Avurei Achsanta is only when a person wants to give to some and not to the others, metoch eva vesino. But if his reasoning is letoivis nishmosoi, she'anoyach lenishmosoi, he has all the right to give to whomever he wants. So he wants to support a koilel. He wants to support a soup kitchen. Lilu nishmosoi. He wants to do chesed with his money. That is not a burech santa. V'yesh la'ayin. So, many times in Gemara we find the Yuka Dereisha goes against the Yuka the Sefer. And usually when the Gemara has a kasha, the Yuka Dereisha, the Yuka the Sefer, what does the Gemara say? Ela maho lekala mashma mina. So we can't prove neither this nor that because the Yuka Dereisha, so I said Yuka the Sefer. So I have a suffix with the Beis Yehuda. Is this svara primarily, it is for me. I have the right to be concerned about my neshama, what's going to happen with me lacha me'avesem. And therefore this comes before giving Yerusha to my children. Or is maybe the Yuka the Sefer. And he writes the issur of Avurei Achsanta is only when it's out of Evel Vesino. But if it's not a reflection of Evo Vesino, there is no Isar of Avurei Achsanta. If we are Mekabel Diyuka de Sefer, I think it's a Teime Gedoyle. Because if the Rambam puts together Lo Olam Lo Yeshana Odam Ben Bein Abonim with Avurei Achsanta, when Yaakov Avinu gave Aksonis Pasam to Yosef Atzadik, it was not out of Eva Vesino. Yaakov Avinu loved all his children. But he loved Yosef even more. Ben Zekunim, the Targum says, Barchakem Hulei. But that is not Evo Vesino. So, in my opinion, there's a Isra of Avurei Achsanta not only out of Evo Vesino, also out of love for one more than the other. No, don't discriminate. They're all the same. And they all should be precious to you. All I argue is, if there's an objective reason, not I love one more than the other, not chas v'sholom, I hate one more than the other. That is the Isra of Avurei Achsanta. And therefore, what the Beis Yehuda writes, there's only an Isra if it's Eva Vesino, no, that is unacceptable. But on the other hand, maybe the Ikar Svora is not Nachas Ruach L'Nishmosoi, but rather, I have a right to give if there's any objective reason. And if I want to care and give tzedakah, I have a right to give tzedakah. And I also have a right if I think some of my children need more than the others. So that is one source. Beis Yehudon, Chelek Beis Emenum Beis. Sefer v'Yosef Avraham, Rabbi Avram Dayan, he was a Ben Doiroi, one generation after Reb Chaim Palachi, and he writes the same. There is no Isra Avurei Achsanta only when a person discriminates. And the third source, which to me is maybe the most important, is the Maharsham. The Maharsham, anybody that learns halacha, you can't ignore the Maharsham, was the Poisek Gedor 150 years ago, the Broshan Rav, and he was Kol Beis Yisrael Nishan Olav. The Masham was the greatest poisek of his time. And everybody is familiar with Shalas Teshuvas Maharsham. He has a sefer on the Torah which is called Tcheles Mordechai. And in the Akdoma to that sefer we find the tzavoah of the Maharsham. And the Maharsham writes in his tzavoah, I appointed my son Reb Tzvi to divide the Yerusha lefi hanera be'enov, and I trust him. So the Masham deals with dividing his Yerusha. And instead of going into details, who gets what, and instead of just writing it, Sevo Pi Torah, P'chanoit Lepi Shnayim, Ein Labones B'mokem Bonim, divide it up fair and square, the Masham writes, I give authority to my son Reb Tzvi, and he will divide the Yerusha according to what he understands, and this will reflect what I want, the Maharsham writes. And the Maharsham was the Poisek Ador, and he is the Moira Halacha L'Kol Beis Yisrael. So these are my sources, that there is no Isser of Avurei Achsanta, only when your Yerusha reflects either you love one more than the other, or Chas V'Sholem the other way around. But if there's any objective reason that a person sees to give some more than the others, that is not the Isra of Avurei Achsanta. And Dogish von Chazal is Lahavir, Asur Lahavir Nachlo. And that is like Ein Mavin ala Mitzvahs. Why skip one and give to another? Kach nera la'aniyos daiti. So now we have to deal with the sugin Ksubas Nun Beis Umid Beis, and that is where we learn the din of Ksubas Benin Dichron. What is Ksubas Benin Dichron? So if you started after Yom Yom Psochim, and you're up to Bava Basa, then a while ago you learned Ksubas. So probably you remember the sugi and Ksubas. Ksubas Benin Dichron is a Takonas Chachamim. When a person marries a wife, and it's a second marriage, and he has children from his first marriage, so his new shver will be very reluctant to give nedunya, because I don't want my money ultimately to go to my new Adam's children from a previous marriage. I have nothing to do with them. So I'm going to give my daughter $1 million, לקבל אחסנתא, and then chas v'sholom, when she dies, and the Yerusha goes to him, Yerusha Sabal, and ultimately it will go to his family, and not to my descendants, and not to my eneklach. So Chachamim were metaken, Ksubas v'nedich, they have a lechiminoi, that whatever you bring into our marriage will go to your children and not to my children. And the Gemara asks, that's Avurei אחסנתא. Because if the money belongs to him, how can he give to some of his children and not to the others? The Gemara says, but it is also the Weiss, kedei sheyiten ish lebitoi kilebnoi. We want to encourage people to give nedunya to their daughters, and not only to their sons when they get married. And how do we know that that is what one should do? Es benoi seichem titnu la'anoshim. A posik in Navi. Es benoi seichem titnu la'anoshim. How could a person see to it that his daughters should marry men and good men? Give money. And therefore it's justified ksubis benin dechan. But the Gemara asks, what about the Avurei אחסנתא? Even though I have a reason, Chazal had a reason to be metakna Avurei אחסנתא. So this question is asked by three Gedolim. Shuvas Chasam Sofer, Even Ezek Ufayin Zayin, Reb Shloime Kluger, Shnois Chaim Tzadik Vav, the Netziv, in his great Sefer on She'iltas in She'ilta Chof Aleph. And all the three have more or less the same approach, and they say, this is not really the Isser of Avurei אחסנתא. But the question was, how could Chazal be metaken et hakon kavua, which l'cha'oira goes against dinei nachalois? For an individual, this would not be considered Avurei אחסנתא. And a person has a right to tell his wife, the money that you bring into our marriage will ultimately go to your children and not to my children. So in the individual level, this would not be considered Avurei אחסנתא. But it's not Mesava that Chazal would be metaken at hakon kavua, and this is a derabon, and this is Tanai Ksuba, which goes against Dinei Nachos. However, that same Gemara Ksubas Nun Beis brings stories that Gedolim Roam didn't want to participate in a Ksubas Ben Endichan because it would be considered Avurei אחסנתא. So, mitoiches boinines in this sugya, I think it's not a kasha on my mahalach. It is actually a raya to my mahalach. So what does the Gemara answer? Why isn't this Avurei אחסנתא? Kedei sheyiten odom lebitoi keshem shenoisen lebnoi. Ez benoi seichem titnu lebonim. Ez benoi seichem titnu lebonim, after all, is just one of the mitzvahs. Haben ala av is lahasiya yesho. It's your responsibility to marry off your children, and you need to do whatever it takes to marry off your children. There is no mitzvah to say for a person to give money to his eidim. All Chazal mean to say, it is what people do to marry off their children. Yes, it takes money. And if you want a good chassan for your daughter, this is what it takes. So it's not a gzeres akosev that you need to give money to your daughters. It is the right thing to do. It is the way as benoi seichem titnu labonim. So I think this Gemara is a raya to what we say. If it's the right thing to do, there is no Avurei אחסנתא. This is not a gzeres akosev that you need to give money. Pshutan shel dvorim es benoi seichem titnu labonim. And the same posuk says, also, your sons, you should see they should marry women. It's the same. So this Gemara proves, if it's the right thing to do, and if it's justified, and is what decent people should do to marry off their children, there is no Isser of Avurei אחסנתא. And I say the same would go to any other justification. If it's the right thing to do, al pi musar, al pi menschheit, there is no issa of Avurei Achsantah.
But this answer for a girl, if someone wants to get the girls when they're our boys, same cheshbon because he wants to have the girls there?
I think so. I think so. It's not the topic we're discussing today, Yerishas Abonais, but in my opinion, yes. I think decent people in our day and age should give their girls just like they give their boys. I never like to be personal when I give a shiur, but just bear in mind I have one son and 6 daughters. So you could just think what that says. So, and finally, I want to say an interesting ha'ara. What is the isser of Avurei Achsantah? How do we know it's also? And why wouldn't we say that a person has a right to do with his Yerusha whatever he wants? But if he has no specific retzonos, then these are din anachlis. If you don't change anything, this is the halacha. So how do Chazal know, and why would Chazal say there's an isser of Avurei Achsantah? Why is it different than Shmitas Ksofim? Hillel HaZoken is metakan apruzbul. So Hillel says, Shmita mishametes, if you don't want to avoid Shmitas Ksofim. But if you want to get around Shmitas Ksofim, that is not an isser. And when Hillel saw there's a need to circumvent Shmitas Ksofim, Nimnu Amel HaHalvos, Omed V'tikin Prusbul. So Hillel HaZoken says there's a din of Shmitas Ksofim. But if Moisés Torah of Lebezdin, that's okay. You're right, a Prusbul, that's okay. 1,000 years later, we find Tkones Maharam, Heteriski regarding Rebis. Now, Shmitas Ksofim is a mitzvah. Rebis is an aveira. And Afar Piken, Gedoli Yisrael at their time, made haramis to prevent and avoid. Yerusha is a din. It's not a mitzvah to say, it's not an aveira. It's a din. So how do we know, B'chlal, there's an Isser of Avurei Achsantah? Why would there be an Isser of Avurei Achsantah? Maybe the Torah says, if you don't mind, these are din Yerusha. But if you want to change them, go ahead. So Lani is daiti. Chazal say, if this is what the Torah sees right, then this is right. And therefore, if you change against the spirit of the Torah, that is wrong. And that is why the Rambam compares the din of Avurei Achsantah to la'olam lo yeshana odam ben abonim. So if all the other brothers of Yosef bought coats, and Yosef was the only one that was left winter without a jacket, without a coat, could Yaakov Avinu buy him a coat? Yeah, probably yes. And the brothers would have no right to be makpid. I mean, you would have coats. He was the only one that was left without a coat. And it's winter. So the entire concept, the entire Isser of Avurei Achsantah is not a Dover Shemuvin Me'elav. Because Yerusha is a din. And how do we know that a person can't circumvent that din? Chazal teaches ba'oimik binosam. If this is the din Torah, then this is justice. If this is the din Torah, this is right. And therefore, don't change it. And that is why I say, but if there is any reasonable siba to change Nachala, as I explained before, it's not discriminating. Some of our children need more help than others. And in many cases, a person falls ill. And he said, I helped my older children marry off their children. But I have one son that still did not marry off his children. And I want him to marry off his children from the Yerusha. I helped his older siblings. I want to help him as well. Would that be an Isra of Avurei Achsantah? In my opinion, definitely not. So, Yesod Advorim. The entire Isser of Avurei Achsanta is, don't get against Musa HaTorah. It's not Gzeres HaKosov. There are many halachas. This is the halacha, but you have a right to change things around. As Hillel HaZoken did, as the Maram Krakov did, the very first at the risk is the Mabed, the Trumas Adeshan, don't want to get into Hilchas Ribis. So the entire Isser of Avurei Achsanta doesn't have a remez in Torah. There's no remez that there's an Isser to change Din Yerusha. It is only Ruach Kodsham v'oimek binosam shel Chazal. Why? Why change what the Torah said? So the Isser is only if there's no objective reason to do so. And that is why the Marsham writes in his Tzavah, my son Reb Tzvi knows the family, he knows what I want, he knows what everybody needs, and I give him the authority to be mechalek the Yerusha lefira oiseinov. So what I said today in the Sugi of Avurei Achsanta, I know that it's a big chiddush, but kach nerel ani izdaiti halocha lamaisa, v'kach ani moire v'bo, and afoich bo v'afoich bo. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike says, Gzeres HaKosov, we don't have an explanation. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike says, it's a Gzeres HaKosov, you could give one more than the other, but only by Re'uim L'Reshet. I'm not asking a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike. What I asked was just, if the place can paskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike, how does that fit in with the Isser of Bro Bisha v'Bro Tova? Bro Bisha v'Bro Tova are both sons. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike, you could give one more than the other. And that is why I say, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is a din. And we must assume that the heter of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is when you have objective reasons to give one son more than the other. If it's stam, then it's the Isser of Avurei Achsanta. But if you have objective reasons to give one more than the other, and Bro Bisha the Bro Tova is not enough of a reason, Del Menofik Mezei Zara Ma'alya, so the Psak Halochik Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is when it's justified. What? No. For Bas you can't do it because it won't work. You don't have the authority. But if you're right at Tzavua Machayim, you could do it for a Bas as well. The Chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is you could be Meshana Dina Yerusha Ben Abonim. Not at Tzavua Machayim, not at Matona Machayim, La'acha Misa. That's the Chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike. My question was only, why isn't it Avurei Achsanta? And that is my teretz. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is Mechadish Adin in Dina Yerusha. Bein Eile Shera'uim L'Reshes, you could be Meshana Dina Yerusha, not Yerusha Mechayim. That's the Chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike. Is it mutar or osur? It's mutar when it's justified, like all the other halachas of Avurei Achsanta. So today we spoke halacha l'maisa and chidushim, and we touched upon many sugyas.
But is there applying a stelle of Yerushas Svaros? To give one son of another, to the second son?
That is a very good question, but my answer is this: Yerushas Sorori, Yerushas Rabbonos. Would there be a problem of Avurei Achsanta? Could a Rav appoint son number 2 and skip son number 1? My answer is he has no authority to do so. Doesn't have authority to do so. It depends on the Kehillah. There is a din of Yerusha B'Rabbonos. I wrote in my Sforim, Yerusha B'Rabbonos is not really a din in Yerusha, because the fundamental din in Yerusha is that the Yerusha need to be divided between all your kids. It is only by Chotzi Eved and Chotzi Ben Choyr and Shittas B'Shamay Oved Esra B'Yoim Echod V'Esatzma Yoim Echod. We do not find if a person has 12 children, every month another child will be Rav. So by Yerusha B'Rabbonos, you can never divide the Yerusha between them all. So Yerusha B'Rabbonos is Tachas avoisecho yu bonecho. It is a din mesuyim in Hilchos Rabonis. It's not mamish din Yerusha. It cannot be din Yerusha because Yerusha must always be divided between the Yorshim, and Rabonis is never divided between the Yorshim. In Simenun Gimel in Shulchan Aruch Orachaim, Shulchan Aruch says that a chazan, when he becomes old, has a right to demand from the Kehillah to pay his son should help him with the chazonas. And that is the din of Yerushas Rabbonis. He's still alive. So the din of Yerushas Rabbonis is more a din in Hilchas Rabbonis than in Hilchas Nachlis. We do not find it in Hilchas Nachlis. We find it in Orachai and Daf Nun Gimel and in Yoredei and Hilchas Talmud Torah. So the din of Yerushas Rabbonis is not in Chush Mishpat. It's in Yoredei and in Orachayim. We call it Yerushas Rabbonis, but it's not mamish a din in Yerusha. Many poskim say, if you don't have sons, then your son-in-law takes over. In Yerusha, there's no din of a son-in-law. It is your children. So, in some places, they would say, your daughter yarshins your rabbonis. Well, but then you're a reformer. Your daughter can't yarshin your rabbonis. It's not ksibis ben induchrin. So Yerushas Rabbonis is a sugya b'fnei atzmai, and it's more about dinay Rabbonis than Dinay Yerusha.